This is the Zoleo Satellite Communicator. It is a two-way global SMS and email device that allows users to send and receive messages using their phone from literally anywhere on the planet, most notably remote areas without cellular service. Now, if you follow my channel, you may be wondering, okay, what is this? Why are you reviewing this on your channel? Well, I am because, as you may know, if you've watched some of my videos in the past, I create landscape images. And that particular type of photography can take you to some pretty remote areas where there is oftentimes no cellular service at all, sometimes not even for miles, and no one around if you're traveling by yourself to help you out if you happen to run into a problem. This is especially true, by the way, in the American West, some of my favorite places in New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, where there are just huge areas of federal BLM land where very few people go except, well, weird photographers, paleontologists, oh, and of course, the occasional alien as well. And as much as I enjoy the feeling of being off-grid and completely unplugged from technology, which I realize probably sounds awful to some people, personally, I have never liked the feeling of being unreachable from my family, the thought of having some kind of medical emergency, or my car breaking down out in the middle of nowhere, which actually did happen to me one time in Utah, which is a rather stressful story for another day. So anyway, for a recent trip to Iceland where I plan to do a fair amount of traveling and shooting off-grid in the highlands and the backcountry, I brought along this Zoleo satellite communicator. So how does it work? And more importantly, does it work? I'm here to tell you. So I think the best way to begin this video is to start with what this device is not, in order to avoid confusion before we get ahead of ourselves here. This Zoleo is not a Wi-Fi bridge. It does not allow you to stream Netflix, watch YouTube videos, or post images to social media. I mean, that would all be pretty cool, but no. It also cannot make phone calls or send and receive email and text messages using your current email address and phone number. What it can do is call for emergency help, send automated check-in messages to a special someone back home, and send and receive email and text messages using a Zoleo provided email address and phone number with the Zoleo iOS and Android app installed on your phone. All of that is transmitted by the device up and down anywhere on the planet through satellites that are passing overhead. So now that you have a basic understanding of what the Zoleo is, and perhaps more importantly is not, let's take a look at the device itself. The Zoleo satellite communicator is small, it's thick, and it's rather rugged. It's essentially an electronic box inside of here that is wrapped with a protective rubber shell that repels dust and moisture. The communicator has a built-in rechargeable battery, thankfully, so you don't have to be replacing batteries out in the middle of nowhere. And this battery can run 24 hours a day for about a week before it needs to be recharged. Once that battery has been fully depleted, the battery recharges in a couple of hours through a micro USB port down here on the bottom. On top of the device, on the face of it here, there are 4 LED lights, and this one up here is particularly important. The one with the, actually I have it upside down, the one up here with the envelope icon. This one lights up when you have received a new SMS or email message through your Zoleo account. And it blinks and it's kind of hard to miss. But if you do miss it, the device also emits an audible sound in case you happen to miss the light, in case the Zoleo is in your bag or someplace else where you're not able to see it. This rectangular button up here at the top, the one with the check mark on it, this is for sending those check-in messages I was talking about earlier. This is such a cool feature. For then, you really have no excuse for not keeping in touch with a special someone back home. No more, oh, I forgot, or I was busy. For any time, you can just press this button whenever you want, and they know you're okay and where you are. But even if that's too much work, if pushing a button periodically is just, if you're not gonna remember, Zoleo can also automatically send those check-in messages for you every few minutes, hours, or however frequent you want for an additional monthly fee. And then finally, over here on the side is the SOS button. Now I get a little anxious every time I open this thing, but this red button here, it is covered with this protective flap in order to prevent accidental use, in order to keep you from accidentally pressing the button. When that SOS button is pressed, the Zoleo device contacts the GEOS International Emergency Response Coordination Center. Didn't even know this was a thing. Your call for help is then forwarded to the appropriate emergency response contact wherever in the world you are, and they will then message you through the Zoleo app to see what's happening, to see if you're okay. And if for some reason you don't respond to that message in the Zoleo app or cancel the SOS, which you can also do, local emergency services will be dispatched to your location wherever in the world you may be. In addition to emergency services, when you press this red SOS button, a message is also sent automatically to 2 people that are assigned when you set up the Zoleo device. So for example, I gave Zoleo my brother's email address and phone number and my spouse's email address and phone number. And if I were to press the SOS button, they would receive messages so that they're in the loop and they know what's going on. And the device would also contact emergency services as well. So that explains the basics of the device and what it does, but what about actual use out in the field? Does it work? Unfortunately, the initial user experience of the Zoleo was not great. Reason being, before I left for Iceland, I talked to my wife and I told her that I would be sending her check-in messages multiple times each day, like every few hours, to let her know I was okay and to share with her my current location of where I was at that moment in Iceland. And well, when I got there for the first few days of the trip, every time I would press the check-in button up here, messages were rarely sent. I couldn't figure out why or what the problem was. And unfortunately, the Zoleo iOS mobile app wasn't helpful either. It was just showing me error messages every time I pressed the check-in button up here. So in frustration, I turned to the documentation and started reading through that. And it was then that I learned that this check-in functionality only works when the Zoleo is connected to satellites that are passing overhead. It does not work when your phone has access to a cellular service or it's currently connected to Wi-Fi. So what I ended up doing was I ended up tricking the Zoleo into sending check-ins by thinking my phone was offline by enabling airplane mode. Then the check-in messages would actually send through the satellite network no matter where I happened to be at the time. But even when I figured that out, I still had problems. Sometimes the check-in messages would send successfully over the satellite. Other times they just wouldn't. I would get an error message and it wouldn't tell me what was going on. And even when those check-in messages were successfully sent, sometimes my spouse would receive GPS coordinates as part of the check-in. Other times the device would just say that it doesn't know where I am and that no location data was available. So I spoke to Zoleo's support team about this, and what they told me was that the Zoleo Communicator is kind of like a satellite dish. It needs open sky above in order to connect to a satellite, and it also functions best when it is laying flat on a surface or on the ground and you're not touching it. So the device may fail to communicate and send a message over a satellite if you are trying to use it indoors, underneath a roof, inside of a car, or in, say, in a forest with a bunch of trees around you. You need to get into an area with an open sky and with a clear line of sight. They also told me that these satellites overhead that are part of the Iridium satellite network, they pass overhead about every 10 minutes, no matter where you are on the planet. So depending on where a satellite is currently in orbit relative to you, the device could form a connection with the satellite, but then lose that connection before a message is able to send. So what you then have to do is just wait a minute or two for the next satellite to come through and then try your check-in message again. And the frustrating thing for me was that none of this was clear when I first activated the device and started using it. It was only after I started having problems and I contacted Zoleo support that I understood the limitations of the device and was able to work around them. But what about SOS? Well, obviously SOS is a rather difficult thing to test without actually opening this flap here and pressing this button and waiting to see how long it takes for someone to respond, for someone to send you a message, or even for someone to arrive at your location. By the way, if you happen to use a Zoleo and you have called SOS on this device, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment down below or contact me personally if you'd like to. I would love to hear your feedback, love to hear your experience, and I bet other people watching this video would love to hear it as well. So to better understand the SOS functionality, I've been emailing back and forth with the Zoleo team, asking them questions. And the important takeaway here, the important thing to know is that the SOS functionality in the Zoleo uses the exact same Iridium satellite network as the aforementioned check-in functionality. which means if the Zoleo device is having difficulty connecting to that Iridium satellite network, having difficulty sending check-in messages, it is also going to have difficulty sending an SOS alert as well. Now, I was told by Zoleo that the device is more aggressive. I'm not exactly sure what that means from a functionality perspective, but they said that the device is more aggressive when it is attempting to connect and send an SOS alert compared to a check-in message. Obviously, I have no way of verifying that, but that's at least what they told me. But something else they told me, which was rather interesting, was that if I wanted to verify that SOS functionality on the device was actually working in order to give me just better peace of mind before taking it out in the field somewhere, I could contact the aforementioned emergency response network and schedule a test to ensure that the device was actually communicating and that they were receiving the message. If that is something of interest to you, if you're picking up a Zoleo and you would like to test yours out ahead of time, I'll leave a link down below to where you need to go and what you need to do in order to test it out. So in general, the initial user experience of the Zoleo device for me was a little frustrating. In my opinion, Zoleo could do a better job with their software, their mobile app for iOS and Android, of explaining not only why errors are happening, but what the user can do in order to resolve them. I also think Zoleo could make the user experience of the device far better and less frustrating by simply allowing check-in messages to be sent through cell and Wi-Fi in addition to the Iridium satellite network. Honestly, it's just weird to me that such a prominent and unique and important feature that has its own dedicated button on the device would have such limited functionality. Ideally, I could press this button at any time from anywhere and my spouse would know I was okay and where I was. It's one of the big reasons why I bought the device. I don't know, maybe GPS coordinates can't be included when connected to cell or Wi-Fi and you have to use Iridium? I don't know. But if that's the case, that's okay. The Zoleo could at least send a check-in message instead of producing error messages, and then the device would work out of the box without any unnecessary frustration or confusion. So, final thoughts here on the Zoleo satellite communicator. Well, I felt that the initial setup and activation experience was good, although it does take some time to set everything up, to establish your check-in and emergency contacts, to activate the device, to get your phone number, email address. I think it took me something like 20-25 minutes in order to do. So make sure you allocate some time to doing all of that before you actually go somewhere, and to make sure that the device is also working properly before you leave. In the field when I was in Iceland, I very much enjoyed the peace of mind knowing that my family could contact me at any time, no matter where I was, even though I was in areas without any cell coverage at all. And also, I had the ability to contact them if I wanted to, and also to call for help in case I needed it, because I was traveling by myself in areas where there were very few other people around. And I know I've been giving this check-in functionality kind of a hard time in this review, but I have to say that when it actually worked, when a check-in message was sent and it included GPS coordinates, it was fantastic. My spouse very much appreciated not only knowing that I was okay, but knowing exactly where I was as well. And by the way, GPS coordinates are really important. I don't know if you remember this story, but there was a story a few months ago about a hiker, I believe it was out in California. I'll put a link to it down below. Someone who went out hiking in a national park somewhere. They got lost, they were by themselves, there was no one else around, and they had 1% left on their phone. And the last thing that they did was they had enough power to upload a photo from their camera. They just took a photo of where they were to, I think it was to Twitter, to basically say, I don't know where I am, I'm lost. Someone please get me, here's the image of where I am. Well, the image did not include any GPS coordinates, and the National Park Service looked at it. They didn't know where he was. They couldn't figure out from the image where he was. So they themselves put it out and said, hey, we could use some help with this. Anyone know where this is? And lo and behold, someone, I don't even think they were in the United States, like they were like on the other side of the world, and they had some hobby and geolocation and this kind of stuff. They were able to reverse engineer the photo, figure out where the guy was, send them the GPS coordinates, and they were like, I think the guy's here. and they went out and they found him, and sure enough, he was there. It's a pretty awesome story, but I'm sharing it with you because it's, GPS in general is just, especially if you're out alone, knowing the exact GPS coordinates of where you are can obviously be rather important. Another thing, by the way, that I also liked about the Zoleo device and the design of it was the fact that I could use my phone and its keyboard in order to send messages, as opposed to some weird, cumbersome screen and user interface on the device itself. I think it's really smart that Zoleo separated the communicator from the user interface instead of trying to bake both into one product, because you can just use your phone, use the keyboard, use the thing that you're comfortable using in order to send and receive text messages, instead of some flaky, weird user interface on this thing. And as explained earlier, I do think there are some definite things Zoleo could do to improve the user experience of the device and their software. But all that said, if I had a choice between traveling with the Zoleo or without one, the next time I go out to some remote landscape without cell access, no question, I would totally travel with one. Just knowing that I can send and receive messages from anywhere, even if it might take a few attempts, it'd be a little flaky, might have to move around and find a clear line of sight so it can, do its thing. That is way, way better than not having anything at all. And for that reason alone, I would recommend the Zoleo for you if you are traveling somewhere in the world without cellular access. And perhaps the information that I shared with you in this video about the functionality of check-ins and having clear line of sight and all that, maybe you then won't have as many problems as I did when I first set up and started using the device. I hope this review answered your questions about the Zoleo and gave you an idea of what to expect when using it. If it did and you found it helpful, do me a favor and give this video a thumbs up. If you'd like to check the current price or perhaps purchase a Zoleo for yourself, check the video description below for a link. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. I will see you next time.